Scoot down one, and we'll sit here.
Yeah, because there's 3 interviewers.
I see. These little chairs.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, boy.
Oh, sorry, Dan. Sorry, Ben.
Is there any way we could move one more? Yeah, I think we could fit one more. Yeah, we could do some. We could do some interstitial.
Here's the mic. So we only got 2. Hold that back down. No time. Since
Nice for all the answers was right here.
first 3 Okay.
Similar language at the same time when there should be the exception to the universal law.
Keep on sending that link.
Sounds pretty good. Sounds like tune.
Where are you sending it to me?
What's that? I'm trying. There we go. There you go. Where do you start it?
Are we live now? Technically?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
We are now.
Okay.
Just got it.
You guys ready? All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're so happy to have you here. Let's hear a round of applause for BODEGA. They traveled all the way from New York to come see you guys. Kind of a big deal. I'll do just quick introductions. To the left of me, I have here Dr. Andrew. I have Dr. Andrew Yupa. One. I have Dr. Andrew Yupa right here. Round of applause. To my right, I have Dr. Brown. Dr. Matthew Brown, head of the Dewey Center. Let's hear it. I have Adam C., bass player of BODEGA. Ben Hosey, mains. One. Maybe. One. Do we only have one mic now? One.
It's very Heideggerian.
I know, right? Broken equipment. One. One.
Guess we're about to find out.
One. Okay, we're back. Ben Hosey, main songwriter. Let's hear it. I have Nikki. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce the last name. I'm going to mess it up, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. Filio. Yes, Nikki. I have Dan Ryan, the guitarist, and we have Adam. Remind me your last name.
Chomsky.
All right, got it. Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna hand you just.
I wish you give me more heads up to close this thing.
This is working. Cool. We're just getting battery switched and we're gonna get going. So sorry for the technical difficulties. Sick.
Okay.
All right. If you want to hand the mic. Set.
All right, well, first, yeah, thank you, BODEGA, for coming out here and talking to. It's really an honor. And thank you, Dawn, for all your work and organizing these and all the students who helped you.
Round of applause for the Philosophy Club.
Yeah. All right, so we have some questions. I think we're gonna put you all, and you can answer whoever wants to go. We all set?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So question 1, in the current age of consumerism, authoritarianism, environmental crises, and screen-mediated life, what do you see as the role of art, music, and what do you see as the role of philosophy? Do their roles differ? Does philosophy have a role? So I guess the first part would just be what do you see as the role of art, and then what would you see as the role of philosophy?
It's a big question, but I think the role of art is the same now in 2025 as it was in the year 25, and it's the same that will be in the year 3025. The role of art is to reveal, is to take nothing for granted, to try to see things as they really are. And the role of philosophy is the same, they just go at it through different vectors. I mean, sometimes they go through the same vectors. Like when I read certain continental philosophers, for example, to me, I thought they're just frustrated poets. And certain filmmakers, like my hero, Jean-Luc Godard, I see him as just a frustrated philosopher who's making films. They're just going about it with different tools and different vectors, but
First of all, it's really nice to be here. I teach philosophy, and of course I also play in this band, so it's sort of a perfect intersection of my life interests. I think that philosophy and art, just like Ben just said, play very complementary roles in times of crisis. In fact, I see the true value of philosophy coming out in times of crisis. When we conceptualize the nature and the importance of philosophy in terms of the canon, right, we get this sort of mummification of philosophers and this sort of sense that philosophy is something that has to be relegated to the academy, and then it kind of gets this sort of dusty book kind of stereotype to it that the philosopher is someone with his or her or their heads in the cloud, right? And one reason that I'm really grateful to be here speaking to you all right now is because the philosopher John Dewey had a massive effect on me. When I first went to grad school in New York City, I was at Columbia University working with teachers at Teachers College. And what we did is we started a philosophy outreach program in line with a philosopher named Philip Kitcher, who was the John Dewey Chair of Philosophy at Columbia. And we put grad students like myself into philosophy clubs, guest lecturers, and so forth. So in any event, I've always seen philosophy as something that comes alive in particular situations, especially in times of crisis. And indeed, if you look at this question from different perspectives from the history of philosophy, you get a lot of different valuable answers. Even going back to someone like Plato, who was basically a closet authoritarian, you get this sense that philosophy is something that has the power to sort of anchor and create a sort of stability amidst times of kind of corruptive public influence. Of course, Plato argued that the arts should basically be banned or at least under serious suspicion by the state. And of course, nobody in this band believes that. But I do think that there's something to be said for philosophy providing a kind of anchor, meaning different things to different people in times of crisis. But really, what I find valuable about the question is John Dewey's response, which is that philosophy, the value of philosophy, whether in crisis or in times of so-called normalcy, is to engage a kind of revaluation of values, a kind of engage in experimental inquiry towards sort of democratic ideals of growth and so forth. Right. So philosophy is that which effectively, tries to create new habits of thought, new values, create new institutions in response to revolving questions and so forth. You get different answers. Mahatma Gandhi said that philosophy, the goal of philosophy is to guide moral action. That philosophy is effectively a sort of a proving ground to sort of test your values, right, against times of crisis. And you get the philosopher Heidegger, who I'm sure we'll talk about today, who argues that the value of philosophy in times of crisis is to stimulate sort of existential reflection on authentic ways of being, living, and so forth. And all those philosophers, with the exception of Plato, argue that the arts play a very complementary role in that.
I can just ask a follow-up question because that's really interesting to me. When you're talking about times of crisis, you're talking about philosophy as the revaluation of values. In his book Experience of Nature, Dewey talks about that process as criticism. Philosophy is the criticism of criticisms. Right? And I wonder, do you think art and music have a critical function as well, and how do you think about that critical function? I bet you have something to say about that.
Well, actually, I'm gonna let Dan take this one, but I have something to say in a moment, but I don't want to monopolize the mic, so.
A lot of people have asked me over the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, do bands need to be political in this age? Which I always say bands need to do whatever the blank it is they want to do. The poet has no obligation to anybody but themselves. But I always say what the poet needs to do is to reveal the truth of their world. And if that doesn't involve social critique, if that doesn't involve any awareness of their political situation, etc., they're not telling the truth. I mean, that's a roundabout way of answering the question.
I agree with what Ben just said. You know, what's coming to my mind right now isn't actually a direct response to your question, but it's something that I think a lot about when I think of John Dewey and these issues. So I care a lot about animal liberation and environmental ethics. And the thing that actually pushed me away from Dewey about a decade ago, I still love Dewey, but the thing that pushed me away from him was this paper that he wrote on animal experimentation, where he argues really strongly for animal experimentation. And of course, I mean, anybody who's read Dewey won't be surprised. He actively describes himself as a humanist, right? And the philosophy is about solving human problems. And that word human like comes up a lot in Dewey. And I was very disappointed in Dewey at that moment, precisely because there's no moment in that paper, at least to what I recall, where he actually considers a sort of critical perspective on that take. There's a sort of almost dogmatism in Dewey, if I may, when it comes to that issue. So yeah, when you say philosophy is through criticism of criticism, I think of Dewey as a very open-minded philosopher, but that's where I got off the bus. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've talked a lot about that issue in Dewey here the last year. So
Yeah.
If I can talk about our band for a second, one of the big impetuses of the gestation of the project, way back when we were called BODEGA Band in 2013, was this realization that I'm a poser, I am a sheep, and most of my thoughts are inauthentic and most of my thoughts are not my own. And I think, if you're in a college environment, the canon is thrust upon you and you kind of absorb it and you grapple with it and you have to grapple with it. And you kind of accept it all as dogma in a certain sense, at least I did. And especially as a rock and roll songwriter, you're told which are the important songwriters to study. And I studied them blindly. And then I realized, maybe when I was 23 years old or something like that, I'm just part of a niche demographic that's been marketed to. Do I actually like alternative music because it speaks to me or because I want to be an alternative person, right? You know what I mean? And so I became deeply aware that I don't really think I'm thought by the culture that we have. So our band's project became sort of interrogating what I call this sort of rock existential crisis. And it is an existential project and a critical one to try to figure out how to be authentically in the rock world. Me and Nikki came up with a phrase called that was sort of the band's mantra for many, many years, and we still use it from time to time. The best critique is self-critique, because we never want to be critiquing from without or critiquing from within. This is why most of our lyrics, in the vein of our social critique songs, are actually really critical of the left, because it'd be one thing to just wave your fingers and be like, oh, look at these morons at the White House and these fascists and blah, blah, blah. And I never want our band to be dogmatic or didactic because I know that everybody that comes to our shows already thinks that. And if they don't, whatever, you know what I mean? It's more interesting to challenge ourselves and I'm fascinated by the hypocrisy of the Homo sapien. Everyone in here is a sheep. And I would include myself. I'm not trying to disrespect you guys. Like my job is as a musician, I'm the court jester who's playing the clown with a microphone on stage, and I'm trying to reveal things that I find to be true about human experience.
Are you saying that in the
Hegelian sense of sheep and the inauthentic?
Yeah, I love.
equals inauthenticity?
Well, sort of like Heidegger has that wonderful concept of the they. when he talks about, and I've been experiencing this my whole life. When I was 12, people at the schoolyard would say, you know, they say this is the show you got to see. They say this restaurant's supposed to be really good. They say The Empire Strikes Back is better than A New Hope. Yeah. Who
Where that?
who is that? And why are we constantly trying to defer authority? And I think that's one of my favorite. This is why Heidegger's maybe my favorite philosopher to read, at least recently, is because he basically sees the they as the Western analytic academic philosophical tradition of saying inside these prestigious halls there's just a lot of dogma and received wisdom, and people aren't actually concerned with the fundamental problems that philosophy should be presented with. What does it mean to be here right now? What does it mean to exist? Who cares whether this table is a figment of our imagination? What does that even mean to be? Yeah, it's a way more interesting question.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. If you,
Okay. I was so busy setting up the stream, I didn't pay attention to our discussion. Who was asking which question?
But are you paying attention to the table?
The table's beautiful. It was also very heavy. I carried it in myself. That marble is real. I guess. Or something. Other than yourselves, right? Who are a few of the most philosophical bands you enjoy listening to?
it's one for all of you.
Yeah. I think Prof, I call him Prof. This is our professor. He recently wrote an essay on Jello from Dead Kennedys and has a really interesting theory about how songwriting is philosophical. I think you should tell.
Yeah, thanks. If you'd like to read this essay, you can see it in the upcoming book, Dead Kennedys and Philosophy. Most of my stuff that I've published over the years so my main area is animal cognition and environmental ethics. Most of my publications are in philosophy and science of animal minds. But I started branching out recently because I'm teaching this course called Music and Revolution into the philosophy of music. And I've always been a fan of the Dead Kennedys. They've always been probably my favorite punk rock band since I was a kid. And in my environmental ethics class, I talk a lot about the idea of environmental justice, which is a concept that I'm sure many of you have probably heard before, reflects the unfortunate fact that domestically and internationally, a disproportionate degree of the burdens of environmental degradation fall upon marginalized communities. And sort of a clear way to put that is that um, those communities that have the least to do with polluting the earth are those that have to bear the brunt of that, whether we're talking about the global south and the climate crisis, or whether we're talking about the fact that something around 30+% of communities of color here in the United States live within a few miles of a petrochemical plant, a hog farm, coal refinery, so on and so forth. Anyway, Jello Biafra wrote a handful of songs actually about environmental justice, and he wrote them, of course, in the early 80s, and this is around the exact same time that the environmental justice movement effectively takes off. And one approach that Jello uses to songwriting that I find really philosophically interesting is what I call caustic impersonation. So those of you who know the Dead Kennedys will maybe recognize this. A lot of his songs are written from the perspective of someone of the villain, right? So the song "Police Truck," of course, is written from the perspective of this sort of brutal gang of cops harassing people, abusing women, and so forth. And he wrote a song about Love Canal, the environmental disaster in Niagara Falls, New York, from the perspective of the individuals who sold these families, these properties on top of a toxic waste dump, right? And the best Dead Kennedy song, in my estimation, maybe it's one of the best rock and roll songs ever, is called Moon Over Marin, which inspired Jello Biafra from, before he was writing these songs, two standard oil tankers crashed off the coast of San Francisco and just flooded the bay with oil and just decimated marine ecosystems. And he writes this song not as a kind of didactic attack on Standard Oil, but he writes the song from the perspective of this kind of like dejected, nameless, utterly boring and vapid, wealthy character in Marin County, which is one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country. And this person doesn't really have any thoughts in their head. It's just like the song begins, I unlock my sort of section of the sand, I strap the gas mask on my head, I go onto my private beach and I bathe in my moonlight. And it's this sort of, you get this almost a sort of Heideggerian like worlding. You're sort of invite, you're like, do you critique this character? Do you feel sorry for this character? Like, you know, and it invites all these philosophical questions concerning where the world is heading. And anyway, that approach, caustic impersonation, is one that I really value, and I've got a few other answers to that question, but I know that about like philosophical bands and artists and stuff. But I know that Ben, because I'm in the band, I know that Ben writes a lot of songs or at least toys with this idea of caustic impersonation too. So I should hand the mic over to him.
The record that made the biggest impact on my own songwriting was the Who's third record, the Who Sell Out. You guys know that record?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just so fun because they're already realizing in the '60s that rock and roll, which could have been this revolutionary, radical, vital force, is really just something to sell to teenagers. And they use that record to sort of make fun of their role in it, and that record always spoke to me. My favorite philosophical songwriter, which people might not think is philosophical, but I do, is Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction. He has this Nietzschean quality about him that I think that was probably my first introduction to philosophy. Like, for example, there's that song "Ain't No Right," which I totally disagree with the sentiment, but the chorus is "Ain't no wrong, ain't no right, there's only pleasure and pain." It's dumb relativist sort of thing, but you know, hearing that when you're 12 years old, you know, wait a second, there's no right. You know, he's sort of Perry's interesting because he was a junkie, which gave him a unique perspective on the world, and he prided himself on being an outcast from society. My favorite lyric of his that really spoke to the 12-year-old punk teenager in me was in the song 1%. It says, "The gang and the government are no different. That makes me 1%." I love that idea. It was basically like everyone in the subculture he was experiencing in the LA punk world at the time. He was saying, well, these people are no different than the government. They all think the same. They're all wearing the same costume. And, you know, to truly be your free thinker, you know, he really grapples with this idea, a pretty radical idea that you gain something when you're part of the community, but you lose something as well. I don't know. I mean, I was re-listening to Jane's Addiction records recently because they're a band that has meant so much to me. And I disagree with so much of what he says, but I still find it utterly compelling, partially because he's so unflinching in his worldview. And he grapples with the things that really matter: death, sex. His songs are extremely horny. Like, for example, in the song Pigs and Zen, he used to do this art breakdown kind of thing where the band is vamping and he would go off on these spoken word rants, which always really inspired me because it's another thing. It's not just the lyrical content that makes something philosophical, it's the form of it. And in the shows, he would be utterly present in the way a jazz musician would, and he would just start riffing. And he would tell you what was going on in his mind. He would say, I know about pain and cold and suffering. I know about war, but I just want to fuck. And it's like shockingly disturbing. But you know what that is? That is radical honesty. And as a teenager, I was like, holy crap, this is insane. Like, most people are unwilling to expose themselves that much in their art because they still have this intellectual thing going on of what is the correct way to behave in society. I think you have to deal with the taboo in art making. Yeah, what are some of your favorite philosophical songwriters, Terry?
I don't really have a long answer here, but one of the things I saw in my own childhood was my parents would put on either Kiss from my dad or like Def Leppard from my mom. But the one thing they both could agree on was Pink Floyd, which to me felt such a radical difference between those two. And I know the joke about Pink Floyd is like, oh yeah, you listen to Pink Floyd, their overarching thing is we live in a society, you know, but I can see in my own childhood that their high concept can reach the everyday, non-artistic human. And my parents will sit down and put on The Wall, which is one of the more insane films and abstract films that I've ever seen about when you get older, how you build yourself as you get punished by the world, and as you experience pain and death, that you build this wall that separates yourself um, between you and society. And my mom, as I think probably a bunch of you can relate, watches Fox News and things, and it's so funny to grapple between someone who can sit and watch The Wall, but won't watch like some new film that we would want to watch that's like really silly or something. I don't know. I think Pink Floyd is probably one of the most like subversive uh, music makers ever. That's my answer. Do you guys have anything?
Say something. Yeah, sure. Got a little something. What do you want to say? You go first.
We're in the line.
Okay. We're not
That's the line.
I don't have a crazy answer, but I think Beethoven was a philosopher and sound in a lot of ways. Um, and his form of rebellion against the status quo was in form itself. And his expansion of the symphony, I think, outside of free movement, I don't have to get into too much into the details, but with his third symphony, he expanded the idea of the form of the symphony itself. He added more movements. He changed the order, um, kind of like fast, slow. And this was actually radical because he was the first of his kind to um, expand outside of art making for the aristocracy. And I think that I don't think he was an incredible thinker in words, um, but I think he was an incredible thinker in sound and in his role as someone who had a benefactor, who was a lord, and who luckily supported his vision. But I think he rebelled in many ways and brought in almost minimalist ideas. He brought in things that sounded 100 years ahead of its time, and he was always trying to be an iconoclast in some way.
Mhm.
Um, he would talk shit about the king and say things. Well, at the bar, I think the king should be hanged from the nearest tree. And he had spies that were checking on him, making sure he didn't say anything too outrageous. And but I do think that he was a great thinker in his form. It's a little more metaphysical and not about sound, but that's what I care about.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, I think for that point, yeah, Ben kind of mentioned earlier that like philosophy and music can sort of manifest in the lyrical content, but also what Dan just was saying about like, the form and certain musical ideas that are instrumental and there are no words to the music, but you can kind of glean a lot of ideas from the music in other ways. Just a little bit about me and Dan as well. We're kind of like more of the musical sort of tradespeople in the band, and my experience coming to Bodega a few years ago was more so through the lens of working sort of musician, and then I don't have like a philosophical background, and my specific sort of musical DNA is more rooted in the jazz tradition, and that's one that I always feel like is deeply philosophical, um, but not in a lyrical sense. But yeah, if you put on John Coltrane, you put on The Love Supreme, or a lot of other albums that I think are great examples of a process in the moment that you're listening to. And I always feel like my approach when I listen to jazz and when I play jazz is one where it's you're in the moment, you're present, and it's not a lyrical sort of art in that same way, but it certainly is one where it feels like, yeah, you're sort of acting out your philosophy. That's how I feel when I listen to jazz. So, yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you. Let's see here. So from songs like Throne and the album named Broken Equipment, existentialism has played a major role on the band. What about existentialism speaks to you as musicians and artists? Do you think that existentialism has something important to say to us in our current life world? And what is it? What is it in your view that existentialism has to say that is so important?
Well, the answer is yes. I've always been attracted to existentialism because no artist is ever satisfied. There's always just like how no human being is. There's always a process of becoming and something, a process of possibility. And as a band, we're always talking about what are we going to do next? What have we done? What have we done in the past? Not necessarily that was wrong, but what choices have we made in the past? And what could we have done differently to communicate different kinds of ideas? This kind of ties into the last question, but I was thinking one of my goals of songwriting is I sort of consider myself a modernist in a way, where in the literary sense of I want to capture what it's like to actually think in real time. And there are certain bands early on in the post-punk movement, like Wire or Minutemen, whose very song forms and the fallout put in this category as well, sort of it sounded to me like what thinking in real time feels like, which means most songs are really thought out ahead of time and they sort of present their thesis to you and it's very clear and well thought out and there's no if and ands or buts about it. But these other bands would almost present thinking through an issue in real time, presenting the confusion in real time, which I found incredibly attractive. And through their very song forms, by having like a 1 minute song that is over before you even attach onto it. That's just like a thought coming through your head, and as you're taking a shower, and you latch onto a memory or you latch onto something like, oh, that's really interesting. Then just when you're on the verge of grasping something, it goes away, and those songs feel like that. So that's like phenomenological or existential music, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's kind of what I'm saying earlier. I feel like the goal of a band is to be authentic in I mean that in the Heidegger sense, which is exactly what Chomsky was just talking about here. Authenticity is being aware of the moment and being aware that you will die and that this situation will never happen again the second time, and to try to grasp and seize the moment. It becomes such a platitude and a corny thing in our culture that live as if you're going to die tonight or whatever. Everybody says that.
YOLO.
Yeah, but Heidegger's whole thing about how to live the most authentic life, spend more time in graveyards. It's still true. Most platitudes are true, but you can't just say them or think them. You have to feel them deeply and experience them deeply. It's the same thing with mystical or psychedelic epiphanies. It's one thing to say we're all one, and it's another thing to really feel like I am all of you. Those are two totally different things. And to say it out loud is incredibly stupid, but to feel it is not. It's a life-changing thing, right?
Yeah, good answer. I have a sort of an interesting history with existentialism that I'm sure many of the philosophers in the room might agree with. I was really into existentialism when I was in college. Go figure. And then when I went to grad school, I found existentialism to be sort of sophomoric, maybe a little bit. And I think indeed to this day, the concepts that I think are really important to explore, concepts like absurdity or sort of intentionally vague, or angst or whatnot. And I think that there's a common criticism of existentialism that is important, which is that all of this emphasis on sort of radical individualism discounts the import of structural changes in society. And I think that's a legitimate criticism of existentialism, whether you're a pragmatist or a Marxist or whatever.
Right, but isn't existentialism a humanism?
Uh,
Checkmate.
And in any event, I think that there's like really three things that are really important about existentialism that are valuable. The first is not so much the radical freedom aspect of it, but the emphasis on responsibility. That along with this sort of radical freedom, like you are in this moment right now, and authoritarianism is looming, and the ICE agents are on your block. And I was just watching something today on social media about this tow truck driver somewhere in LA who took it upon himself to tow away one of ICE's vehicles, right? And like that kind of courage, like how many people would do that? I'm sure that he or she, whoever it was, faced this moment of like, I can do this right now. I can really, really do this right now. And it's like, what do you stand for? And in this sort of, you can turn towards a kind of nihilism, or you can take from that a kind of responsibility about your values, what you stand for. I think that's really important about it. I think that in addition to focusing on those concepts like anxiety and absurdity, that there's a relationship there between um, uh, that's really important for the modern world with respect to, for example, the climate crisis. We're all right now living through the sixth mass extinction. Hundreds of species are going extinct, right, on a weekly basis. Uh, the Earth is barreling towards this tipping point where we hit 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. 500 parts per million of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We're expected to hit that by 2050, right? Anybody in this room who's a student is going to have kids. I mean, that's their indebtedness, and yet here we all fucking are, just hanging out, right? And there's something about that kind of collective absurdity that I find existentialism speaks towards, and that sort of responsibility. And the last thing I'd say about it is I've always liked how existentialism and the arts are really close bedfellows, right? Literature, visual art, cinema, right, plays, and that's something that existentialism can speak to that other areas of philosophy don't quite so naturally fit into.
That's one of the only philosophies that it kind of gives you not necessarily a guide of how to live your life, but it is a very practical philosophy. Um, which might have been the first since the Greeks or something like that, where it's actually philosophy that you can read for pleasure and can give you an idea of how to act the next day.
But like the issue I said first is in my situation way more important, which is this is where I agree with Dewey. Like we need to focus on institutions, institutional changes at all levels of society. Like we need to focus on more workers' co-ops to circumvent the effects of like capitalism and things like this. And the existentialist just does not emphasize structural change, at least historically. And I find that to be like with respect to practicality, pragmatism, I find that to be a massive lacuna in what they're talking about.
But if you're a good existentialist, you can maybe, okay, the best way to live authentically is to enact this structural change. Right? Once you've figured your own self out, now you can start to tackle these structural problems.
Let's ask Heidegger about that. Have you
Well, he was thrown
into Nazism?
Yeah, he was thrown into Nazism. I was reading Being Time today, actually. And there's that whole chunk on destiny, which is really troubling. And he's saying all these great points. To go back to the day he drops, as you guys are aware, they think, therefore I am. I just had to drop it in a dream. God, I can't go easy on. So good. But then all of a sudden he starts learning about the destiny of the people, and it's like,
This and something you were saying earlier raises a question for me about this concept of authenticity, right? I think we have this psychological tendency to think, we are free thinking people, like driven by our own sort of internal stuff, and they are, they're all fools and dupes and sheep, right? But in fact, we're all human beings, and our behavior is kind of generated by the same largely social habits and institutional pressures. And it's not that those guys over there don't understand anything, and that's why they don't trust the experts. And we listen to the experts because we have a very, we're all smart about science and stuff, right? In fact, like they just listen to different people than we listen to. We all kind of take it on trust. It all kind of works the same way. Like there's a kind of sociological, anthropological, psychological sameness to how we operate. Right? And I feel like this notion of authenticity, even by, you know, the great thinker Heidegger, can kind of blind him to the way he's operating, right?
Well, to his credit, he says in Being Time, I am inauthentic. And this is a problem every Dasein has to deal with, is their own inauthenticity. You can have an authentic moment, but then 5 minutes later, you're going to fall into inauthenticity. And I find that to be really refreshing and charming because it is a constant struggle to be honest and present and to really listen. And I totally agree with you. What you said, I find very moving and beautiful because I do think there's this tendency to think there's all these idiots out there. And, you know, from someone that knows all five of us, we're five of the biggest ding dongs you've ever met.
Maybe.
No, you're the ding.
Okay, it's really-
I'm not the ding. Ding dong says one.
Okay. Some philosophers, such as Soren Kierkegaard, use pseudonyms with different convictions of living to show different existential perspectives to philosophical problems. How is your new project, BODEGA, approaching similar questions and themes differently than BODEGA? Where do you see the two projects converging?
So for those who don't know, our band is BODEGA, but we put out a record this summer where the artist was No Dega. It was sort of tongue-in-cheek thing, but also just messing with the algorithm. But really the record is exploring early hardcore 80s punk music. So the BPMs are beats per minute are extremely fast. So the beats are, you know, it's extremely fast. And we're playing in this sort of hardcore tradition, which is so formulaic. I would almost say it's more like a folk art than capital A art. Although I think the distinction is kind of stupid, but it is very formulaic. And what I like about hardcore is how bratty and teenage it is. I mean, the original hardcore movement was made by children, literally like 13, 14-year-olds. Like my favorite hardcore band, Minor Threat, were not playing around. They were minors when they recorded that stuff. And there's something wonderfully joyous about that teenage ecstasy of just playing as fast and as angry as you can. And I find quite a freedom enjoying it. But one thing I like about hardcore is the text is not poetic. It's didactic and it's bratty and it's just in your face. And this is what I think. Deal with it. You know, the social critique songs in hardcore tend to be like that. But also, there's a sort of like quasi self-help side to hardcore. I find it incredibly ironic that the Bad Brains, they read that Napoleon Hill self-help book, How to Think and Grow Rich, and it has that concept of PMA, positive mental attitude, which still to this day, like groups like Turnstile and stuff, they tour the world and they espouse PMA. And it's this joyous celebration where we're going to play fast and we're going to slam into each other. But they want everybody to feel good and sort of like manifest this positive thing. And I find that there's something about the self-help and like the didacticism that's both those things are very unartistic things. It is wonderful. I don't know. But so by pretending to be a hardcore band, and it's not really a hardcore record because me and Nikki are singing very melodically. I think real hardcore people would say, "Why are you guys screaming? It's not hardcore." It's like you guys are indie rock people faking being hardcore, which is that's what it is. But for example, like I think one of my favorite tunes on the No Dega thing is this track called "Quantify."
Yeah, quantify sick. Listen one.
So I was thinking about how everyone rates everything in the modern world, right? It's like you got to rate your Uber experience, how many stars out of 5. You have to rate, your restaurant experience. And if you have a letterbox, you want to rate your cinemas. If you have a good read, you want to rate the books. And, as a cultural consumer, we all do that. We sit around the bar and we drink and we say, well, what are the top 5 Smiths B-sides? What are the top 5 Paul McCartney solo EPs or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, we make such a game out of that, but I actually find it a really sick, disturbing way to live your life. It's a constantly be quantifying and ranking, listing things, and I think it's going to have social implications. I fear that we may like what is supposedly is already happening in China, where people don't just have credit, like a financial credit, you have a social credit. And if you showed up accidentally late to a meeting, you now lost some points there. And now you might not be able to get into this other event, or you might not be able to buy this car or whatever, you know what I mean? And I find it really disturbing that we could get to a place where we would be ranking every conversation. We would be ranking all of our friends. We'd be and quantifying every little nook and cranny of the internet. It's a capitalist wet dream, really, is this quantifying thing. Because it's like we have to give value to every little interaction that you do in your life. And that's not how things work. It's certainly not how music works. I don't know about you guys, but when I listen to a song, I'm not like, that was a 4.5-star song. It's such a stupid way to think about art. It's like, maybe, yeah, it's like maybe I liked that song. Maybe that song did something for me, and it might do something different for me 10 minutes from now. It might do something different for me 2 days from now. And it doesn't have value because it's either good or bad. Like it's this weird Roger Ebertification of art, where it's like 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down, like Rotten Tomatoes and all these things. Like the higher your Rotten Tomatoes score is, the more bourgeois your movie is, because you're just, there's nothing polarizing about it. So how could it possibly be good? Yeah, it's this weird. So, anyways, hardcore is a really good thing to try on, because we can, like a Jello thing, I can bait the audience and tell them that I can predict what they want. And by the way, how many stars would you rate this fuck? Yeah, it's aggressive. Yeah. And I mean, like, it is a pun, because I'm like, sometimes like an Italian gangster would be like, listen up, you fuck. So it's like, they're talking to this person like they're the fuck, but also it's like, imagine that you're making love with your partner, and it's like, how many stars would you rate this? Would that make sense to bring something like that?
That's right.
Do you want your rating?
What's that?
I'm just here for the quips. I don't have a mic to say it all.
I got something to say. I love the BODEGA project. When Ben told me that the idea was to make a hardcore EP next, I lit up inside. I grew up on punk rock music. My introduction to punk rock music was a Canadian band called Propaganda, which is not technically hardcore. It's a sort of 90s sort of skate punk band with big thrash influences. But I remember in their liner notes, there were links, or not links, but there were references to Noam Chomsky books and books by Howard Zinn, and right on their album is very didactic. It's like pro woman, like animal liberation, just all of the like very much in your face, the sort of anarchistic politics of sort of total liberation for all marginalized groups. And when my favorite song in the No Data record is a song called Gestation Crate, which is the final song of the record. It's probably the most didactic song that Ben's ever written, at least that I've heard. And it's a song about animal liberation. Well, it's a song, it has larger themes going on with it, but it's very much sort of in that vein. And for those of you who don't know what a gestation crate is, the gestation crates have been banned in to my knowledge, one state, that's California, but most of the pork produced in the United States and elsewhere, the sows have to spend the vast majority of their lives in these metal tubes. And they can't turn around. They're basically on their sides, and they have to give birth to their infants, and they sort of who suckle them through the bars of these gestation crates, and then the infants are taken away from the mothers shortly after, and mothers react in a very vocal, heartbreaking way. And when I'm on stage and I'm sort of playing that song, there's a part of me that really comes full circle. It reminds me of being a kid, listening to the Propaganda records, and now as an adult, as a philosopher of ethics, environmental ethics, and as a punk rocker, as an adult, as a 40-year-old. It all just seems to kind of make sense to me. And so I love the No Dagger record.
Excellent. Our final question. We're so excited to hear about your newly recorded album. For those that don't know, Bodega's recorded a new record coming out in a year. Get ready. How did and what philosophy, if any, went into the songwriting and the conceptualization of this new album? Should we expect more versions of Kant's categorical imperative? We're gonna get more versions.
Do you want it?
Not really. Actually, not, but.
So when we started writing, what is going to be, there's actually going to be two albums. That are kind of both written at the same time. What we talked about, we've written a body of work, maybe like 80, 90 songs of, and I would say 90% of them are in the vein of social critique. And I kind of felt like, okay, me and Nikki really talked about it for a while, and we thought, let's take a break from that. And I've been really interested in different kinds of philosophical content, type of thinking. I've been writing a lot about time. I've been writing a lot about memory. Writing a lot about death. So it's the new Bodega it's a little it's very un-Bodega like. It's almost like Bodega actually came after most of those other songs had been written. I think Bodega was like the id of me being like, wait a second, you're gonna write all these songs about time, these bigger abstract concepts. There was like my id was rebelling against it, and it's like, no, we need to thrash. Don't get soft, you know.
We call it Proustian.
Yeah, we've been really into. We've been saying the word Proustian, but have you guys read the My Struggle books, Karlova Knutsgaard? You know, so he's Norwegian, although he lives in Sweden now, and he wrote these really daring, somewhat disturbing books. And the title, of course, is ironic because my struggle's a translation of Mein Kampf, although he's not a fascist. It's, but you know, even so, when I'm reading those books on the subway, I make sure to cover. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. But basically, he boldly says art in the 21st century might not mean anything. So I'm just going to tell my story, and it's memoirs, but they're so intensely confessional, they're disturbing to read because he kind of makes this pact, which, you know, we can talk about whether it's good or bad, and I'm still grappling with it, of this concept of radical honesty. So, for example, like he drops his daughter off at a daycare, and then he's like, I'm really sexually attracted to this daycare teacher, and then he'll write about it. And it's like, it's refreshing to read somebody that honest, but it's also like your wife is going to read this. What is wrong with you? Why are you sharing this? He breaks like the codes of how to act in society, right? And in fact, what's crazy is his uncle sued him in between books like 3 and 4, because the first book is sort of about how his dad was a hardcore alcoholic and how that shaped much of his upbringing. And the uncle thought you're disparaging the family name, so he sued him. And then Karlov is such a psychopath that he's like, this is great plot. So, like, you know, so he just keeps writing about the trial, and he's like sharing screenshots of the emails. And, you know, it's like you don't want to be friends with this guy because you'll get sucked into his orbit. But at the same time, it's intoxicating because I've never read anybody be this honest. And most people, when they write their memoirs, or in fact, when they talk about themselves at all, they either make themselves a hero or a martyr. And he does neither. He has the unique ability to sort of study himself like a scientist studying an insect. And he's like, here's why men are terrible. And I'm an example. Let me explain some things I did. You're like, I can't believe you're telling us this. You know, it's amazing. Yeah. Anyways, but so I reread. I mean, I didn't reread. I read all those books, and to get through them all, it's like 4,000 pages or something. And I started. You know, it's inevitable that when you're reading someone examining their own past, I started to think about my own past, and I had a troubling childhood, and to sort of survive, I just left. I left the small town I was from in South Carolina, and I didn't talk to any of those people. I pretended like I was a different person when I got to New York. In fact, I saw it as like an existentialist project. I'm now on Bodega Ben, and that old Ben is not a real person. And I just kind of like, it's weird how I just kind of blocked it all out. Like I didn't think about it, you know what I mean? And because I have no ties, like some people can go home to their childhood house and they have physical ties, like, oh, this is a teddy bear I have a house too. I had nothing before the age I was 25. I just don't have anything. So I had, but all of a sudden, these memories came flooding back, and I remember what it was like to be, 14 or 7 or 6 or whatever. So I decided I wanted to write more memoir songs, but I wanted to do it sort of like not from the child's point of view. What was it actually like to be 7, and what did that room smell like? It's been a very psychedelic project, but actually I said we had 2 records coming out. We had all these big anthemic pop rock songs, and we had a lot of these. When you're writing in that Proustian mode, you tend to be writing a lot of ballads, and I thought it was going to be this big sprawling double album or something like that, but we split it up into 2 records. So yeah.
Excellent.
So no con.
No, hang in. I'm good with that.
Well, actually, I will say this something about Kant, and I had this epiphany pretty recently.
Just calm with you, man.
So I was a philosophy undergraduate, and I was obsessed with Kant. And if I'm looking back now, and I've been thinking about, like, what is it that drew me to Kant so much? It's because when, I bet all of you have had this moment where you discover the call of philosophy. And for me, it happened was just reading Plato and reading about Socrates. And I sort of realized, when you grow up around mentally ill people, they'll tell you one version of reality, and it's either their way or the highway. And there's this part of you, this logical part of you, that's like, that's not true. But you can't argue with it. You know what I mean? So when I found Socrates budging Euthyphro, saying, well, what does it really mean to be pious? You know what I mean? He's like, well, pious is what is pleasing to gods. And he's like, well, what pleases the gods? And he's like, well, being pious. And then he exposes the circular logic. I was like, this is what it was like to talk to the mentally ill people I was growing up. And I saw philosophy became so important to me because it was a way of staying sane in an insane world to try to, and Kant so spoke to me because, as you all know, Kant had that wonderful architectonic system in which, well, okay, you have these questions about aesthetics, and actually, if you know something about the sublime, it's connected to the concept of the categorical imperative, and in fact, that's connected to his epistemological theories. And, everything's connected, right? So he basically has an explanation for everything in the world, and it all relates in this neat, tidy system. And I really wanted to figure it out because I think I wanted to control chaos, and I think that's a lot of what analytical philosophy tries to do. It's like a refinement of common sense. It's like I'm going to die in the hill of common sense, but there's the person that's listening to Gene's addiction doesn't believe in common sense. I want to embrace the chaos of the world, and I think the older I get. You see Kant as the sad, pathetic guy that he was. As beautiful as this project is, it's rooted in control and fear.
I just want to. I feel like I have to plug philosophy for a second based on what you're saying. So, like unnecessary quantification, like rules everything in higher education now, basically. And we had to respond to this report from the state of Illinois that says we shouldn't have, so many philosophy majors, philosophy programs, because there's no jobs for them, right? Because the only job for a philosophy major is a philosophy teacher, right? That's ridiculous, right? So many interesting careers come out of a major in philosophy. Musicians, actors, artists, writers, technologists, business people, you name it. There's some big people in the top of their achievements that have studied philosophy in some way. Right? Not the only career path that can lead you there, but I think it's, if you're wondering what's the value of a philosophy major, like I love what you said about it.
value of this, really want to say, I appreciate that. I love philosophy, I'm not trying to denigrate philosophy at all. And like one of my teachers used to say, whether you want to do philosophy or not, you must do philosophy, because you have to make decisions in this world.
That's right, it's like blood.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's blood, you know. Well, everyone, that draws this event to a close. But outside at the rotunda, we have free food. I would like to remind everyone, tomorrow night at Hangar 9, Bodega will be performing. Doors open at 8, show starts at 9. I would get your tickets now, so you can get it for $8 instead of 10. And I would like to give a very special shout out to Cola for putting together the food, to the GPU for helping fund this, to our the SIU Philosophy Department, and Hangar 9. This has been a collaborative effort between Hangar 9 and the university, and we love seeing I don't know, such a synergy happening in our city, right? And being able to bring students this type of enrichment and giving us the opportunity to meet people with such great minds, and means a lot. So, all right, guys.
Thank you guys for coming.
Any questions?
No Q&A?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions
No.
before we leave?
Any questions you have, ask Bodega out there. We're gonna set the ATM out there. Great photo opportunity, so go for it.